Thursday, January 7, 1896. The New York Times. Naptha tanks exploded. 1 man killed and 3 injured in a Brooklyn factory. Building and plant demolished. Narrow escapes for those who got out alive. William Miller ran, his clothing on fire, and is expected to die. The United States and Canada degreasing factory at Montrose Avenue and Stewart Street, Brooklyn, was blown up by the explosion of 2 naphtha tanks shortly after 1 o'clock yesterday afternoon. 1 man was killed and 3 others were hurt, one so badly he is not expected to live. The man killed was Zach George, a laborer employed in the works. The injured are Miller William, severely burned, not expected to live. Miller George, the engineer, burned, taken to St. Catherine's Hospital. Parker Albert C., the superintendent, severely burned, taken to St. Catherine's Hospital. The factory proper, which was a 3-story brick structure about 25 feet square, is a mass of ruins. The upper story was blown several hundred feet away by the force of the explosion, and the entire plant, which manager F. Lamb says cannot be replaced for less than $20,000, was broken into fragments. The place of the accident is near the city's dumping ground, on the outskirts of the city, and in an almost impassable swamp. It is bounded on one side by an arm of Newtown Creek and is surrounded by a number of small factories, which for several years have compelled the neighboring residents to keep their windows tightly closed during windy evenings. The factory had been in existence for 4 years. It was one of a dozen manipulated by a syndicate of English capitalists, at the head of which is a Mr. Turner, who is now in Europe. The names of the other stockholders are not known to any Brooklynite, and all information as to their personality and whereabouts was yesterday refused by manager Lamb, who answered all inquiries with the stereotyped evasion, "That don't make any difference in an accident of this kind." The company makes a specialty of extracting grease from sheep and other skins and preparing them for the tanner. The force generally employed at the factory consisted of manager Lamb, Albert C. Parker, the superintendent, George Zeck, a skin handler, George Miller, the engineer, Sam Monk, George Alfred, and William Miller. There were no floors in the factory. A few platforms served this purpose. On the second tier stood 2 naphtha tanks, 12 by 6 feet and 5 feet deep. These are the tanks which exploded. The skins were placed in them preparatory to undergoing the process of cleansing. Shortly after lunch hour, Zach and his partner, William Miller, returned to their posts on the second floor. Superintendent Parker, Engineer Miller, and George Alfred went into the engine house, which was a shanty a short distance away from the factory proper. Alfred told to a reporter for the New York Times the story of the disaster. "It seemed as if the very earth trembled," he said. "I saw the roof and walls of the old engine house falling directly upon Engineer Miller and Mr. Parker. The debris pinned them underneath, but I got outside the ruins of the engine house and shouted for help. On reaching the outside, I was horrified to see poor William Miller running like a madman toward the swamps. He was a mass of flames, which shot over his head high up into the air. I followed him and finally caught up with him in the swamp. He appeared to be too dazed to help himself. Finally, I knocked him down, tore off his burning clothing, and threw my own coat over him to extinguish the flames. It was a fortunate circumstance for Engineer Miller and Superintendent Parker that Mounted Policeman Nichols of the 6th Precinct was within a few hundred yards of the factory when the explosion occurred. The report was deafening, the policeman said, and the explosion shook the boats on Newtown Creek and broke several windows on Johnson Avenue. As soon as I saw the flames, I galloped my horse to the headquarters of Engine 27, and soon had Foreman Walkerman, his engine, and a force of men at work rescuing the men who were caught and held fast among the falling timbers. I hurried back to the factory so as to give what relief I could. Zeck's body was taken to the 6th Precinct station house, where it was viewed by Coroner Eason. The sergeant at the desk and others believed it was the body of Manager Lamb, until otherwise informed by a reporter for the New York Times. Zeck was unmarried and boarded near Irving and Flushing Avenues. He was 25 years old. William Miller, Alfred Parker, and George Miller were taken to St. Catherine's Hospital on Bushwick Avenue. William Miller's face, hands, head, and body were frightfully burned, and the doctors said he would die. He is 24 years old and lived with his wife and family at 432 Jefferson Street.